on Netflix, if you haven't already. Jo Segura lives in the Pacific Northwest with her husband and doggo, who vies for her attention with his sweet puppy dog eyes whenever she's trying to write. Her dog, that is, though sometimes her husband too. Her stories feature strong, passionate heroes and draw upon aspects of her life, such as her love of good food, her Mexican heritage, and her fascination with archaeology. When she is not writing, you can find her practicing law, shaking up a mean cocktail, or sitting out on the patio doing BuzzFeed quizzes. Though she doesn't care what the chicken nugget quiz said, her favorite fruit is not banana. Without further ado, it is our pleasure to present tonight's speakers. Hello. Hi. These are rocking around. So I'm Julia. And this is actually the first time I have done this where I have actually interviewed another person. So becoming, I've been that person many, many times. There we go. I have not been this person before.
And I'm Jo, and I am so excited to be here, my alma mater. But especially to have Julia agree to do this, I found out while I was in the meeting, and it just popped up on my watch, and I almost screamed in the meeting. So, and then I had to hold off. I couldn't actually check my email to find out what was going on because I was in a meeting, but I was dying to see it. All I just saw is, OMG, she said yes. And I felt like, the groom asking.
I know, like very funny for me because I normally am home and like when anything like that happens, my family's like, you? Really? But anyway, we'll get right into it. So part of the reason I said yes is that I had actually read your book before they asked. Because yes, so one of the really nice things about being an author is that you have, well, not every author, but me. I have access. Sorry, people. Maybe you do. I don't know. I have access to this really cool thing called NetGalley, which means like I can request to read books for free. With the idea that like maybe I'll say something nice about them, and I've totally just shamelessly going on whatever reputation I have managed to amass that like people will care if I say something nice about their book. So usually, sometimes I get denied. Actually, I'll ask for a book and they'll be like, no. But
they deny me all the time.
Oh, really? Well, sometimes I don't think I've ever been denied one that's actually romance, but I have been denied some other ones. Anyway, so I saw your book and it's like, oh my gosh, there's a book called Raiders of the Lost Heart. I want to see that. And so I had actually already gotten it and started it. And when they asked, and so I thought, okay, well, this will actually be really fun. I didn't realize you were from around here. So I'm really curious as to, so I'm guessing you all kind of figured out, if you haven't read Jo's book, that there's archaeology involved, right? Okay. Do you have an archaeology background at all, or are you just super interested?
I'm just super interested. I wanted to be an archaeologist, but I am not. But I've always loved like Indiana Jones and National Treasure and The Mummy, and like those are like some of my favorite movies, and I just love them. And so at one point in my life, I thought maybe I'd be an archaeologist, and I went on an archaeological dig in Belize. We were looking for Mayan artifacts, and we actually discovered some really cool stuff. We saw some, like a lot of pottery, a lot of broken pottery, but we did find a skull that had jade inlays in the teeth. It was just fascinating. But you're out there all day, you're hot, you're sweaty, you're just filthy dirty. And I had the time of my life, but then I did something else. So, and I can't really say why I never pursued it, but it was still like one of the coolest things I've ever done. And I've always still had that fascination with archaeology. So when there's ever like a movie that has, a treasure hunt or anything like that, I'm always there for it. And this book, I just felt like I needed to really dive into that love for archaeology.
So how did you research it? And how much of it was you, because I will admit, I suppose I could have done more research, but like some of the figures and mythologies that you have in there, did you make that up, or is that based on real stuff, or where does it come from?
So it's a little bit of both. So if you haven't read the story yet, it's about these two rival archaeologists who are in Mexico searching for remains of this ancient Aztec warrior. And Dr. Corey Mejia, the main character of the book, she believes that this Aztec warrior, Chimali, is her ancestor. Chimali is completely made up, but some of the historical events that are discussed in the book are real. So the downfall of the Aztec Empire, having the Spaniards come and basically invade their city and wipe them all out, that all did happen. But this character, he's made up. But I thought it would be really interesting to have this character. She thinks that he's her ancestor, and his whole story is that he fled the Aztec Empire because he fell in love with a commoner. And in that civilization, you wouldn't have a warrior and a commoner in a relationship. That would be frowned upon because he would have been more in a noble class, and she would have been in a lower class.
Sorry, this is sounding a little bit like Regency times.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, those things carry on throughout our history, and so I thought it'd be really interesting to have this story, where what they're searching for is still rooted in love, and in the end, it's still a romance. But I had to do a fair amount of research on the Aztec civilization. I knew a good amount, but I really took that time to really dig into it a little bit more, no pun intended. But not all of that is necessarily in the book, because you just need to have that context when you're writing it. And I'm sure so same for you.
One thing that I've always told people about research is that you'll end up going down these rabbit holes. And it always happens at a time when you don't have those 6 hours to be researching the provenance of one painting. And if that sounds really specific, it's because I did do that. And it's like one of those things where and I think this is a little different for you, because I think the whole sort of what you research is much more central to the plot. But for me, where the history is kind of more sprinkled in, it's not quite as central to each plot line. I find that I end up going down these rabbit holes to find these details, and you could remove any one of these details from the book, or probably any 2 or 3, and it would be just fine. But I like to think that the abundance of them really helps to make a better just setting, a more realistic setting, just to give it a little bit more three-dimensionality, especially for somebody like me who doesn't write with a great deal of detail. I tend to write fairly sparely. So I love the way you describe that.
Well, I remember one of the very first romance conferences I went to, there was an author there. I don't recall who it was, but she was talking about writing in Regency romance. And she said that she had made a reference to a specific coin, and readers are like, that coin did not exist.
This wasn't me.
Was it you?
No, it wasn't me.
Oh,
I'm trying to think. No. I'm trying to think if I heard of this, because there's also I tend to be somewhat familiar with a lot of these things. Like there's an author named Adele Ashworth who made a reference to a champagne flute, and apparently it was like 10 years before champagne flutes were invented, and so that was like the great champagne flute scandal of 1999 or something.
You have to be careful. Even with a book cover, they originally had a white cockatiel on the cover, and it was beautiful. And I'm like, I love the bird. Can you give me a different bird, because they don't have cockatiels in Mexico? And so it's a macaw. And
it's beautiful.
And
like white would not have worked on this. It would, like the color scheme.
It actually was really cute, but
they just work with me here.
Yes, you're right. It wouldn't have worked. But it's little things like that where you think it doesn't make a difference, but it really does make a difference. Like those little teeny details that when you're just reading it quickly, you might just kind of skim over it, but it gives you that whole experience that really builds the book.
I will tell you a secret though, since you write contemporary romance, it's actually, I think you have to do more careful research than I do.
Oh.
Yes. So if I make a mistake, I will hear about it. Although I will be honest now, 98% of the time when readers call me out on a mistake, it's not a historical fact I messed up. It's something against my own fictional universe. Yeah, I've done that before where they're just like, well, so-and-so wouldn't be married yet. I'm like, you're right. Okay, so but I also think like if I mess something up, you can kind of like budget a little, or it's kind of, but if you mess something up, you are actually like insulting somebody's like actual life experience in a way. So here's some famous examples. I know, a lot of pressure. So for example, Kristen Hanna, who we're all familiar with, and she is a local author. Before she was writing the wonderful books she's writing now, she was writing equally wonderful books that were like but historical romance. Now she's writing sort of general fiction. And she's based out here, and she said something in Maine, and she was just thinking of the West Coast, and so she had the sun setting over the ocean instead of rising over the ocean. Yeah,
Rookie mistake.
She heard from like so many people, and then another one in my own personal experience that got me. I was reading a book by a really well-known author, and it was set at Radcliffe College, which is where I went to school. And she spelled the name of the dorms wrong. And I was like, that is so easy to look up. But like, or just like if you're reading a book set in Seattle and somebody has somebody going the wrong way down a one-way street, it pulls you completely out. Much more so than if I'm like, I think, I'm not sure that word was in use in 1812. It doesn't, I don't take it personally. So watch it. I'm just saying it's much harder for you.
Well, I was just watching a movie the other night that was set in the 80s, and they used the term legit. And we had to look it up because the husband's like, they wouldn't have said that. And I was like, I'm going to look it up. And they have been using that word since the 1890s.
Ooh.
So, but not that way. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, but still,
Too legit to quit.
You need to look those things up.
I'm Gen X, so yeah. Yeah, no, these are like the fun things that like keep us up at night. To be completely honest with you, my biggest mistake. Well, I don't know if it's my biggest mistake, but kind of the one that looms biggest in my mind was I wrote this book. It's called Just Like Heaven. On sale here. Just Like Heaven, which is the first book in the Smythe Smith series, and in it, I had a character. Because how sometimes you're trying to describe someone to someone else, and you're like, oh, you know what I'm talking about? It's his cousin's aunt's friend's house cleaner's niece. And I thought, well, if we do that now, surely they did that back then. So I had somebody describe somebody in that manner. Okay, I never said who it was. But it was an Easter egg for readers. And it was just sort of like, if you'd read my other books, you would know that I was talking about Colin Bridgerton. Okay, established character. Right. But also for that whole intricate thing to work, he had to have already gotten married. Okay. Later in the book, he shows up at a party and he's not married. Okay. Now, I would like again to point out that within the confines of this one book, there's nothing incorrect because I do not name him at the beginning. Right. Anyway, I didn't catch my error. My sister, who knows my books better than I do, didn't catch it. My editor didn't catch it. The copy editor didn't catch it. I heard from readers 3 hours after it went on sale.
Goodness.
Yeah, so
Fast readers.
you got to watch it, basically.
Okay.
But moving on, I would like to hear a little bit about your journey to publication, because one thing I get asked a lot by readers and aspiring authors are questions about getting published. And my first piece of advice to all of you, to people, is just saying, like, don't ask me. Because I was like, I published my first book. I got signed my first deal in 1994. And to put that in context, when I sold my first book, I did not have an email address. Okay. I had to print out my whole manuscript. And in fact, I was living in Berkeley, California, and I took the train and BART into San Francisco. So after hours, so I could do it at my dad's office because it was too expensive. I couldn't afford to do that. I had to mail the whole thing. It was crazy. So it's totally different now. So I say you need to ask somebody who is newer, who has a clue as to how you do this. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, it is much different. You do not print it out anymore. In fact, most places say, do not send a hard copy or we will throw it away. But I've been writing for a really long time. I've been writing since I was a little kid. But really, it wasn't until I was in my late 20s or so when I really started writing like more novel length stories. And they were always romance, but I still didn't really think I would do anything with them because it was always, well, I want to be an author, but that's for other people. That's not for me because I need to do, I need to focus on my schooling. I need to focus on my career. And, even though being an author is a career, that can't be my career. But I got to this point where I had written all these manuscripts and I just thought, hey, I'm just going to see what can happen. And there used to be these pitching events on Twitter where you would pitch your manuscript in 280 characters. And agents and editors who are acquiring, they would. I hate Twitter.
That sounds so horrible.
It is horrible. But anyone who was acquiring would use that hashtag for the day, and if they liked your post, then you were supposed to submit your materials to them. It didn't necessarily mean they were going to sign you, but it meant that you had a little bit more of your foot in the door than if you just sent your materials into what they call the slush pile. And that day I was like, oh, I'm going to pitch this story, see what'll happen. And I decided to give it a year. I'm going to really try this for a year, see if I can get an agent. And then if I can't get an agent within a year, then I'll reevaluate and see, maybe my writing isn't ready, or maybe it's just not for me, or maybe I need to do something different. And publishing is very slow, and you send out your manuscript and then you wait.
I have to tell you, it's slower than publishing. Oh yeah, it's glacial. Oh, go on, sorry.
It's very slow, and so I wrote another book, and that book is Raiders. And I'm waiting for this other manuscript to maybe get an agent's attention. I write this manuscript, and months later, there's another one of these pitching events on Twitter. And so I was like, well, I'm still waiting on that other book. I might as well pitch this one too. And my agent, she already had my other manuscript. She saw my pitch for this one. So did my now editor. She also saw this pitch and they both liked it. And so the next day I ended up talking with my agent. I signed with her. And even though she had two manuscripts of mine, the time that I had written this was during the pandemic when everything was just so awful and people wanted to laugh. People wanted rom-coms. And so we thought, let's move forward with the rom-com because that's what people are wanting. And so we sent that one out on submission. And 2 weeks later, we heard back from Berkeley, my publisher, and we signed the deal a year after I had made that 1-year commitment to pursuing it.
So exciting.
But everyone's experience is so different. Like for some people, you send your stuff out on submission and you're waiting for years. Some people, they hear back right away. And so it's kind of hard when people ask you, oh, what did you do? How do you get published? It's all about timing. It's about finding the right person for your story at the right time in their life. Because it might be, I'm sure everyone has read a book where, you open the book and you're just like, nah, it's not feeling this book right now. And then you go back to it, months, years later sometimes, and all of a sudden, really, it sings to you, and all of a sudden you're really just eating up the book. So I think a lot of it is about timing.
I thought we might open up to questions from you guys for a little bit, again, because this is my first time doing this, so have pity on me. So yes, right here.
Looping back to your conversation about research, have you ever emailed an expert to try to get an answer to a really obscure question just because you wanted to know the answer?
Oh gosh, I have not.
Oh wait, we should repeat the question.
Oh yeah. The question was, with respect to research, have you ever emailed an expert to get an answer to some research question? Personally, I have not, partly because I have this fear that I'm going to send out an email like that and they're just going to ignore me, or that I'm not even going to know what question to ask. But for for Raiders, I didn't need that level of detail. I have had a couple of archaeologists say that there are depictions of archaeology in here that are pretty accurate because it's not what we think of when we like see Indiana Jones. It's not really how it is, but
I don't think it counts if I ask my husband.
is he from the Regency era?
He's not from the Regency era, but he was a junior Olympic fencer. And so one time there's a scene where two people were fencing and like he helped me block it, and I still messed up. I think we fixed it before the book, but I remember at some point the copy editor wasn't this person standing up before? And I was like,
oh, they always get you. Like
yeah. And then also for medical things. I love putting medical history in my books. My husband is actually a professor here at University of Washington at the medical school, infectious diseases. So yeah, we had a really fun pandemic. But anyway, I've asked him some medical things. So that's why like I've had characters with malaria. I had somebody with like massively infected wound. I had a guy you're laughing, but it's so much fun. I sent a hero to medical school, which actually he was not able really to help me. I had to actually research for that, but more medical education than actual medicine. And then when I would ask him questions, I mean, like the 21st century doctor doesn't know much about bloodletting. So there's that. But yeah, no, I was able to do that. So I don't think he counts. And I can't think of like cold calling a research question to anybody. Does anyone else have a question right now? Yes.
Were you surprised that the name of the book wasn't taken?
Okay, so the question was I surprised that the name of the book wasn't taken? I will admit there is another book, if you Google Raiders of the Lost Heart, there is another book called Raiders of the Lost Heart. You will not mistake them. It is very different.
Is it like Christian or something?
No. It's like a space sci-fi romance thing. I don't really know what it's about, but there's like a spaceship on the cover. So you're probably not gonna confuse them. But I don't know, maybe she got some extra sales.
I will say, when I saw it, I was like, I remember looking and being like, how is it possible nobody's done this before now? And nobody's come up with this author. And then I thought this title, and then I thought, how is it possible I've never come up with this title? Because like I love titles like that. So that was part of the reason I grabbed it.
Oh, I love the punny title.
Oh yeah.
Question.
So why romance? Why did you choose when you started writing? Why did you throw yourself into the romance genre?
I'll take that one first. The question was why romance? Why is that what I write? It's because it's what I like to read. It's as simple as that. It's funny. A lot of times I get asked that question. I think people are expecting something much deeper and layered and nuanced, but it's truly just what I was reading for fun. And people say, well, why the Regency? It's what I like to read. And only later did I sort of realize it actually worked very well for a writer with my both skills and weaknesses. It worked really well for me. But yeah, it's just what I like to read.
For me, I've always just loved like love stories, movies and books. But it wasn't really until I wrote that very first manuscript that's so bad. It's terrible. It's embarrassingly terrible.
Is that the one your agent was looking at?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. This is
You were all wondering that.
this is a really long time ago. I wrote this manuscript, not even knowing what kind of book it was. I just wrote it. It was a story in my head. And when I was done, I was like, what is this thing? I was like, oh, this is a romance. And then the next thing I wrote was a romance. And I'm like, oh, I guess those are the stories that are in my head, a romance.
So were you a romance reader?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was just curious about that because one of the things I think that happened, make it about me, but one of the things that happened with Bridgerton, which was very interesting, the show, which is very much structured, each season is a romance novel, is that I think there were a lot of people who watched it and they were like, wow, this is great. I wonder if there's anything else like this. And I was like, yeah. And I felt like the scream you heard was like 1,000 romance authors being like, you just watched a romance novel. Yes, and a lot of people just didn't even know it was a thing. So the way you were describing that, I was wondering if maybe you didn't even know it was a thing. That's something.
No, I loved romance, but I've read a lot of different types of books. Like I read a lot of thrillers and suspense. That's probably after romance what I read the most. But it's funny because a lot of people that I've talked to about Raiders have picked it up because they thought it was more of an adventure book. And I've had a lot of male readers, in fact, who have read it. And they're like, yeah, it's this really great adventure. And it's got some romance. I'm like, no, it's a romance with a great adventure. Like, it's, to me, it is a romance book. But if you're looking for, that adventure, then you get that as well. Questions?
Oh, in the back?
I'm just curious, that you mentioned having been doing this since 1994, like talking about romance. I think the kind of perception of romance has changed a lot over that time. Do you feel now, I think it's so much more mainstream now and not sort of like, but I'm just curious about your thoughts, both of you.
So the question basically was, correct me if I'm wrong, is just about sort of the changing ways that how romance is perceived by society has changed over the years. I think it definitely has a lot more in the last probably 5 or 8 years. So, it's sort of changed, and then changed quite a bit more. There are a lot of different things that go into that. I could start waxing on about the history of the clinch cover. The ones with like Fabio. And what's really interesting is that, before Bridgerton, the TV show, the second most frequent question I got at events was, have I met Fabio?
Have you met Fabio?
I have not met Fabio. And he's not on any of my books. He was on a lot of Joanne Lindsay's covers. He was on a lot of covers by Avon Books, which is my publisher, but he actually started like winding that down right around the time I got published. And then he authored some of his own books. And I just want to say that I believe like the NDA is no longer in force. They were written by Eugenia Riley, who was a lovely person. I think he had a little input, but anyway, the point is like that just gives you an idea of like perception that literally the first question was, where do you get your ideas? Which I find I'm like, Poughkeepsie, I don't know. But the second was honestly, have you met Fabio? And so I think people really saw romance in terms of these covers. And the very fascinating thing is these covers were actually designed to appeal to men, not women, because many years ago, did you know this?
No, I
No,
didn't
see,
know.
like Romance History 101.
Research.
There you go. So, and if somebody can prove me wrong, I don't want to hear it, but
No fact checks.
no fact checks here. It's not fake news. But anyway, so the way that the book industry used to be, and is still a little bit now, is that actually with mass market paperbacks, which are the paperbacks that are smaller size than this, which is how romance used to be exclusively sold, the majority of them are actually sold not in bookstores, but in grocery stores and Walmart and Target and places like that. And in huge numbers. The print runs were much bigger than they are today. And you would have to sell these books to the middlemen who would then buy like a whole bunch of the books, and then it would go out to their distributors who would then rack them into the shelves. And so basically what happened was somebody made a cover like that, and it was probably my publisher for like, Rosemary Rogers or Kathleen E. Woodowitz way back in the 70s. And, you got like a very buxom lady falling out of her dress, all these things going on. And the guys, because it was all men who were buying these for the stores. Because remember, this is only like a couple of years after women could even get a credit card. And they were like, this is incredible. Look at this. It's going to sell like hotcakes. So they put in a huge buy, and so then all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of these books would go out. And, if you put the books everywhere, more people are going to pick it up. So then it's this huge success, and then it becomes self-perpetuating. People are like, well, clearly we need these covers in all the books. And that's how romance novels got clinch covers. It really started with what they thought was what somebody thought would sell. And they were right, it did sell, but then it became like the old, suddenly that was like shorthand for how you would know you were getting a romance novel. And, it didn't do, some people love those covers. I was not a huge fan. I've seen some I like, but for the most part, not that much. But it really did kind of help give us a stigma because, you know, you didn't necessarily look super intellectual carrying them around, which is too bad. And, you know, now I like think, okay, well, we can do it proudly. But so yeah, it started with that. You know, I remember once being at a book signing and, you know, being like, hey, do you like romance novels? And a woman actually said to me, she's like, I don't think women with advanced degrees read books like that. And I was like,
But we write them.
yeah, I just looked at her, I was like, and you know, and I know it's in my bio, but I try not to like drop the H-bomb that often. But I was like, well, I have a degree from Harvard and I just dropped out of Yale and I read them, you know, and so and I did actually drop out of Yale, which is kind of fun. But anyways, the point is like I have been through that. And now I've reached the point where, to be honest, I don't really get that anymore. I think, you know, if anybody tries, I'm just like, yeah, dude, I have a Netflix show. No, I mean, I don't mean to sound really self-absorbed, but like, if somebody's gonna be rude to you about that, yeah, dude, do you have a Netflix show? 'Cause I have a Netflix show. So sorry, I know now I sound like really, like, can you vouch for me? I'm actually a nice person.
I will.
Oh, thank you. I work with Lillian all the time. But since that's just me, like with the haters, I think it has actually gotten. I can't even remember the reading question. I'm slithering on here, but yeah, it has gotten. You know, I'm no longer sort of this like oddity that, you know, people I meet like, oh my gosh, what do you do? You write what? What? You know, now it's kind of fun because they actually get it.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes and goes. There's always like some article out there that talks about, you know, this romance is different than all the other romance, right? Where it's like, oh, she's not like the other girls kind of thing. But you know, it's always going to be like that is the way I see it. But I do think that there are a lot of people who just embrace that we like romance. There's nothing wrong with that. This is what we want to read. And some of the best books I've ever read are romance books. Who cares?
There's a great quote, which I will probably get a little bit wrong, by Nancy Pearl. You guys all familiar with Nancy Pearl? Yes. Okay. So Nancy Pearl used to be the head librarian of the Seattle Public Library, and then kind of became the most famous librarian in the country, which is like, actually, when I met her for the first time, I was upstairs when they still had books upstairs. And the children, I was in the children's book section, and they're like, Julie, Nancy Pearl's here. And I looked, I was unwashed in sweats. I mean, I looked horrible. And she must have said to me 40 times, I can't believe you're Julia Quinn. And I was like, usually I clean up. But I was like awestruck. I got back at her later because I ran into her another time here and I introduced her to these kids I was with. Not my kids, they were somebody else's kids, but I had them anyway. And I was like, this is the most famous librarian in the country, which totally embarrassed her, which was really fun. But she has this quote, which basically says like, literary fiction, and I think you can extrapolate that to most forms of fiction, is always judged by the best of its examples. And romance is always judged by the worst. And I think that's true. I think that whenever, it's become less so now, but it used to be for years. I don't know how long you've been part of the Romance Writers of America. Well, Romance Writers of America doesn't really exist. I mean, it does.
Well, it does, but
yeah, anyway. But they used to have this big conference every year, and it was kind of like the center of our romance writing year. And if you live in some city and 2,000 romance writers are going to like come to your city in the middle of summer, somebody's going to write an article about it. And they always would send somebody from the local paper. And they would always write an article and they would find the romances with the cheesiest covers and the craziest titles, you know, the titles that like indicate like all 6 tropes that are in the book, you know, the rancher's secret babies, you know, husband's bride, you know, but, you know, with a ghost.
and only one bed.
Yeah, and only one bed. Yeah, it'd be all, which is kind of funny because actually, you know, if you go on Amazon, like that's what they'll have the title, and then it'll be like, "Hey, Rancher Secret Babies, Brownie and that ghost story," because they need all the metadata. But then, you know, they would do that, and you know, I'd be like, it's so easy to find a bad romance novel. I'll admit that, but I'm like, it's also not that hard to find a really good one. You know, and I just, so it really bugged me that like people would, I felt like they would search out the worst of us. And I feel like that has changed. I feel like now when we're getting press, people don't automatically say, let's find the craziest romance novel we can. And instead they're like, let's find one that's doing something different. Let's find one that's like, suddenly like, finding archaeologists. How cool is that? And so that's been a really nice change. Yes.
Okay, I kind of have two questions, but if you don't want to answer two, you don't have to. My first is I was intrigued, I was interested, what is that first story you wrote? But then my second question is more related to, I know with Bridgerton, working on that TV show, you're working with writers and directors and actors, and that collaborative, I'm assuming that collaboration has potentially led to changes in your writing. So I'm just curious how working with others on that material has potentially shifted your writing. And then for you, I'm curious what your collaboration process is like as a new author. Like, who do you collaborate with, if anyone, when writing your books?
Oh man, there's a lot of questions there.
I know.
I'll go first because my answer is actually really easy. So she just asked whether with Bridgerton, the TV show, she assumes I have a lot of collaboration with the writers, the directors, the actors, and all that, and has it changed my writing? The truth is, actually, I have no collaboration. I have given over complete creative control to Shondaland when I signed the contract. And so I am a consultant, but what that means is they actually don't have to consult me. And if they do consult me, they don't have to listen to me. And that's what it is. And actually, I think we're doing great with it. Sometimes I do hear people online saying things like, I can't believe she gave up creative control of her books. She's just in it for the money. And I think, well, you're not completely wrong. But the truth is that, I gave up, I guess this is a longer answer than I thought it was going to be, but I gave up creative control for two reasons, really. The first one was that when this happened, I was very aware that it was not just a once in a lifetime opportunity, not just for me, but kind of for my entire genre. It had just, nothing like this had ever happened to anyone I knew in romance. The closest was Outlander, which is still, has a lot of romance in it, but it's not really romance. And I did not want to mess this up. I wanted to be the author who was a delight to work with. But that said, it's very easy to do that when the people coming to talk to you about it are Shondaland, who are so good. And I'm not going to tell Shonda Rhimes how to make television. Please. So I don't have that much collaboration. The one exception would be with Queen Charlotte. The novel Queen Charlotte is actually, I wrote that based on the scripts that Shonda wrote. So that was a little bit more of a collaborative process, although it wasn't like Shonda and I were holed up somewhere. She wrote the scripts, handed them off to me, and then I wrote a book. So it's very much a taking turns thing.
Have you found, though, seeing how other people interpreted your work changed your writing in any way?
The question is, have I found that seeing how other people interpreted my work, has it changed my writing? I don't know, because I haven't really written a completely new book for a while. So we'll see. I don't think so, but we'll see.
So for me, she asked what that very first book was about. I just can't. It's just broke like all the romance rules. It was a romance.
Wait, you didn't kill the dog?
I didn't kill the dog, but there are rules and you cannot break them. And I broke some rules, and so I will not admit to which ones I broke. The other question, though, was about my collaborative process now with being published. And actually, it has changed a little bit. I wrote this book during NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. Most of it I wrote during that month. And what you see here, in fact, it flows literally exactly how I wrote it. Sure, we edited it and, we added more description and more feeling and all that, but the story is exactly the same. With my second book, you have a lot of doubt when you are in this process. Before your book comes out, you're worried that no one's actually going to read it. And I'm putting myself out there and people are going to either not buy it or not want to read it, or they're going to hate it. And so you just have all these feelings when you're trying to work on that second book, and you have all this additional pressure because even though I wrote this one pretty quickly, I could have taken 10 years to write that book. But once you're under contract, then you have a timeline. I had to turn in my book by a certain time. And I just doubted myself when I was writing that book. But I knew, I really loved my editor at Berkeley. She just has a really great eye for things and she's really great with stories. So I knew that once I had it in her hands, she would help me to find what that book really should be. And so when she sent back the edits, it was like everything I knew that was wrong with the book, she was like, hey, let's work on this. And having just, even though she didn't say, write it like this or change this to be like this, just was more, maybe rework this section or think about this, or can you, give them a little bit more backstory or whatever it is. And it helps you to look at your book from a different perspective. And so it really helped. And I just turned in the draft of book 2 with the developmental edits on January 2nd. So that was a fun holiday. I pretty much was just in my office.
I've had that holiday. Yeah.
Oh my God. And I had it last year too, because originally it was due at that time last year. And I was just in there nonstop. My computer kept crashing on me. Word crashed on me 4 times the day before it was due. I was like, yeah. But once I turned it in, it was like, this is such a better book. And I know it's mostly because I had that collaboration with my publishing team.
So I have to ask, does this book have a title yet? And does it have a pub date?
It does. I'm not allowed to announce the title yet, but it's supposed to come out December of 2024, that first Tuesday in December. I have seen the cover though, and I love this cover. It makes me smile. The colors, the character. Yes,
I love this cover too.
Like, it was like perfect.
Here's your photo.
Perfect. But then I saw the cover for book 2 because I was like, remember, this is going to be so good. Book 2 is going to look so stupid. No, it's so awesome. I can't wait to show people. It's beautiful. Yes.
So, Joe, are you still working outside of writing?
I am. Yep.
She asked if she's
question.
working outside of writing.
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're right, that's a job. Do you have a job that's still actually paying the bills?
Oh, yes.
Because your writing career, you take off enough to pay the bills?
So the question was, am I making mad bank now that I'm a published author? So that's another thing that I think you don't really realize until you're in it. The way you get paid is so slow, and they break up all your payments and these little nuggets.
I have to tell you guys what happened to me over Christmas. I'm sorry. I was at Barnes and Noble in New Jersey. That's where we were spending Christmas with my daughter, who's an adult, and we were in there, and we went over just because I don't ever go to any bookstore besides this one anymore. So I was like, okay, I want to see what my book's like at Barnes and Noble. So we there we had to like rearrange it and get the ones off the bottom shelf up to the top, right? Because like I still do that. And as we're doing that, this woman turns to me and said, "Did you start reading the books after the show?" And I wasn't sure what to say. And I was like, well, actually, I wrote them. And she's like, oh my gosh. It turns out, she's a big fan. It was really nice. And then she said to me, I'm sure you get this all the time, but wait, is this being recorded? Okay. Yep.
It is being live.
Oh, it is.
Well, all right. She was really fun and lovely. I'll put it up this way. But she said to me, she gets this all the time, but like, can I ask you some questions about writing? And I said, oh, sure, yeah. And she goes, well, can I get your number? And I was like, oh, no. And she's like, well, like your email? Like, no, you can just ask me like right now, basically what I'm saying. And so I was expecting like, typical, how do you get an agent? All these things, what are your ideas? And instead, she's talking about, she works in Silicon Valley, and she's just basically, she really wants to write, but she, is trying to figure out when she, could possibly get. So she's like, surely, between 2 and 3. And I'm like, million? And she said, yeah. It's like, I don't think most authors are making that. I just, really? And I said, no. And she's like, not even, and she like names another author who we talked about who has written a lot of books. And I was like, well, I mean, I can't speak for her, but, I certainly can, tell you based on, my experience before I actually had a television show, like I never came close. And she was like, really? And I was like, no, really not. So I think people think we're doing a lot better than we are. She was like really bummed to find out that like if she went into romance writing, it was going to take a while before she was earning $2 to $3 million a year.
I'm not making $2 to $3 million yet. Yeah, it's interesting because you do get paid like when you turn in the book, when the book gets published, when the book's been out for a year, and then you can also earn royalties on top of that, but you
will eventually, I promise.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I haven't earned that yet. The book's only been out for
no, you haven't earned that yet.
But it's just, I think a lot of authors do have day jobs, and the dream is to be able to write full time, but the reality is I probably won't be writing full time for a very, very, very long time. Though my true dream, and many of you know this, is that someday I will write part time and work part time at Trader Joe's. This is my dream. I talk about it all the time. I'm not just saying this. I want to work at Trader Joe's.
I have this. Do you may be too young for this, but do you follow the Holderness family? I love the Holderness family. Do you guys follow the Holderness family? Okay, they're really funny. I mean, when they got famous with the Christmas jammies thing, and then anyway, they have this really funny video about like imagining like what the product development people are like at Trader Joe's. I better email to you. It's really funny because they're totally like, they're just like, it's almost like the match game where they're like, you name something and I'll name something and we'll combine it. So one's like cheeseburger, and the other one's like crackers, cheeseburger crackers, and then it's like cinnamon, and somebody's like latkes, cinnamon latkes. It's just like all these crazy things that they do.
It's true. And I am the sucker who's like, ooh, that sounds interesting. I will try almost everything at Trader Joe's once. Sometimes I've been burned.
What's your latest Trader Joe's find?
My latest find?
That like is really good that maybe we should know about.
Oh man. Well, this is not a latest thing, but just because it's on my brain since we just had it, are those peppermint yogurt covered pretzels that they have in the holidays.
They make my favorite cookie, which are the maple leaf cookies. Have you seen those?
Oh, I haven't had those ones.
I can't have them in the house.
And then like the peanut butter cups, the dark chocolate ones. It's kind of dangerous walking down the aisle that has, I think it's at all of them, but at mine at least, it's frozen and then all the treats.
Yes.
How dare they?
I don't know. And they used to make this. The other thing that's so horrible is that they discontinue things. And yes, okay, I'm still upset about it's called Rainforest chili, and on the front it said beef C, beans no. And I like beef, but it's still really good chili. They discontinued that like 25 years ago, and I'm still smarting.
That's what they do.
I know.
Now I will say there have been some things that I'm like, I'm not going to get that again. And somebody recently brought up to me these pickle corn dog pup things. Tried them. I won't get those again. They were bad, and I love a corn dog. No, this is just like a Trader Joe's.
Yeah. we would often have dinner. Like one of our classic like dinners when my kids were growing up was like dumpling night, where we would just get like a whole bunch of different Trader Joe's dumplings. And then I would make like a ginger garlic sauce.
I did just try the Mandarin chicken. I hadn't actually tried that before. It's not as good as Panda Express.
Okay, admit it. This is like way more interesting than anything we're talking about.
I'm sorry, into the back. Well,
hold on. Wait, I have to like just briefly tell. Like, there was an author here. I didn't go to the signing, but I had them like had her sign a book for my mother. What was it? The not the Art of Costco. The Joy of Costco, which was like a whole book about Costco. So I feel like someone needs to do the
I'm gonna write The Joy of Trader Joe's.
You should. Like my mom lives alone and shops at Costco. That's been like her. I mean, I think just recently I think with the pandemic, she finally stopped shopping at Costco. But like back when Y2K was a thing and everyone was worried about the world shutting down, everyone's like, we'll be fine because we can go to Jane's house because she is stocked. My mom hoarded toilet paper. She started hoarding toilet paper in 1973. So we were.
You were good then.
Yeah, we were so fine. I mean, my mom, and then she accidentally bought like 6 rolls of the toilet paper that you put in the public restrooms that are actually. She thought she was getting she found like, this is in this pandemic, the last like set of online toilet paper. You know, everyone was out, and she's like, I found toilet paper, I'm gonna order it, and it came in, and they were this big. I gave one as a gift to my friend, and she's like, you don't understand. This was like my security blanket toilet paper throughout the pandemic. She's like, we never used it, but as long as we still had it, I knew we were okay.
It would last for 4 years.
Yeah. So this may explain things about me. I don't know. But anyways, okay.
Okay, we had a question in the back.
I wanted to ask, so you have a regular job. How do you then find the time and the energy to write? Like, when do you write?
So the question was, since I have a regular job, when do I find the time to write? For me, a lot of it's more about having the inspiration. If I tell myself, I'm going to sit down and this is my chunk of time that I'm going to write, and only in this chunk of time, I will sit there for 2 hours and write a sentence. And it's like, well, I just wasted 2 hours. I find that my best time to write is usually early in the morning. I get up pretty early with the dog before like most people are working, and I can write really well at that time. And then I stop and do the day job. I'm not really a great evening writer, and then weekends I write. But I don't do a ton of stuff. It's not like I'm, a typical Seattleite where every weekend I'm out going skiing and hiking and biking and all that cool, awesome stuff that makes this place so great. I did that before, not all of that, but I did some of that before. Now I'm kind of a homebody, so I just find the time when I can.
I want to know what kind of dog you have.
I have a Swedish Valhund. If you don't know what it is, look it up. If you are a Husky fan, then you will love them because they look like mini Huskies, but they're short and long like a Corgi. Ooh, he's very cute. He's very lovable. Do they what?
Do they howl like Huskies?
No, he's a yapper barker, and his bark is very grating. But he's very old, and so he can't hear that well. So now he doesn't bark as much because things don't startle him like they used to. But yeah, he's a barker, not a howler.
Did you say people call them Viking dogs?
Yeah, Viking dogs. Check them out. They're very, very cute, very lovable, a little stinky.
I think we have time for one more question. We've got one more. Okay, right there.
While writing books, you create characters that you like and that you don't like that much. How does it feel to finally get rid of the character?
Oh, that's a good question. So she asked, when you're writing books, you write characters you like and characters you don't like. And how does it feel to finally get rid of the characters you don't like?
So in my second book, there is this character who is just like the biggest jerk. And I'm writing this character and I'm hating everything about him. I'm like, why am I writing this character? And finally, I'm like, I gotta get rid of this guy. But he's already so ingrained in the story. I couldn't just like cut him completely. And he had a purpose at the beginning, so it made sense why he was there. But I needed to find a way to get rid of this awful, awful character. And when I did, it was like, yes. And my editor, she reads it, and she like every time like he says anything, she's like, I hate this character so much. And I'm laughing so hard because I hate this guy. And then when I finally got rid of him, he doesn't die because that's not how my books go, but she said, she just had, yes! And I was like, so, yeah, it did feel pretty good. I'm glad he's gone.
I mean, if you feel that way about your writing, I heartily recommend that you look into writing mysteries. So, this is my story. There's a cozy mystery author named Diane Mott Davidson, who wrote a lot of books like, about like with fun little food puns and stuff in it. And I met her once, and we both lived in Colorado, and it turns out that we had the same contractor doing he did most of my kitchen, he did like her counters or something. And she was like, oh yeah, she goes, I killed him off in a book. I was so upset with him. So and I was like, yeah. Because at that point, like, I'd had a falling out with this contractor, but I mean, what could I do? I wasn't gonna put him in one of my romances. I mean, he's not very, courtly or whatever. Yeah, so yeah, if you want to get rid of people, start writing mysteries, because it's a great way to get rid of your rage. And on that note, I think Thank you. I want to get a picture of everyone with Julia and I. Oh, okay.
I don't know if this will work, but I think I'll try.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Thank you, everyone.